Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. My name is Kathleen Olive, and shortly I will introduce you to today's presenter, who is Dr. Louise Marshall. Before I do that, however, I'm coming to you from Gadigal country, so I would like to acknowledge that I'm on Gadigal land of the Eora Nation. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who might be joining us today. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. We had a lot of interest in this session. I'm under no illusions as to why. I know you're all here to listen to our speaker today, Louise Marshall, talking to you about some of Italy's most beautiful places, which contain, in my humble opinion, some of the Renaissance in Italy's most outstanding artworks as well. Before I introduce Louise, I just want to remind you, because we do have a number of you who are attending live today, you can send through questions at any time. You can just use either the chat or the Q&A function. I'll feed them, I'll weave them into our conversation where they seem most relevant, or I'll hold them till the end and pose them to Louise one after another at the end if they don't come up organically during our chat. So please just use either of those functions at any time to send through any questions or comments. And you can also, of course, always send through any questions for those of you who are watching after the fact. When we send out the recordings, you can send any questions to us by email and we'll refer them on to Louise. So without further ado, Louise Marshall, thank you very much for joining us today. Louise has a PhD from the University of Pennsylvania. She was Associate Professor of Art History at the University of Sydney, where she taught for a number of decades, where she has, I should say, quite the reputation for being a very dynamic and engaging teacher. And I'm sure some of you have attended public lectures that Louise has given on Italian Renaissance art at venues such as the Art Gallery of New South Wales, in which case you also know that she is a very engaging and erudite presenter who does a fantastic job of going behind the artworks and helping you to see them in new ways and from new contexts, which is so useful. Louisa's personal area of expertise and research specialization is the Italian Renaissance, quite specifically on images of plague saints. So I recommend whenever you have time with Louise to get some weird and wacky information about people like Rock and
Yeah.
Sebastian. But we may not even talk about them today, Louise. Maybe you can weave them in. But thank you, Louise, for joining us. It's a pleasure. So, Louise, we thought we'd
I'm
start
very happy to
today.
be here.
Yes, and we are talking around a tour that you're leading for us in October. We're not actually going to talk in the order of your tour to the Renaissance courts of Italy, which starts with Urbino, then moves to Mantua, and then concludes in Ferrara. And that is an order. This tour, how it works, is always dictated by hotel availability. So rather than talk in the order of available hotels, we decided to shape the conversation almost chronologically in a way. But before we get into that, we did discuss starting with your first kind of encounter with the courts of Renaissance Italy, some of which are located in very beautiful locations. So, what's the most memorable interaction you've had in one of those places?
Well, in fact, what you just had up on the screen, which is Urbino, which is, I notice in your travel description, we talk about it as fairy tale castle, and that is it. It is just the most magical place. It's incredibly special, and I've been a number of times, and it's always, you go up and up and up, and there you are finally at this like a city, a palace in the form of a city. It is just amazing. And particularly when you're in front of the Palazzo Ducale, you're right at the top and everywhere else is down. But I think Urbino is of all of them, because they are all fabulous, but I think Urbino is the most special. And I do vividly remember being there over multiple seasons, including one when it was very wet and raining and a lot of the streets became muddy, but still, you just loved being there. It's so fabulous.
There is I am the one responsible for describing it as fairy tale Urbino. It's always the first
No, you're
adjective
right. It's
that
sort of
comes.
like a Disney castle. In
It
fact, I
is.
have a my PowerPoint which I can share with. Oh, I have to do share screen first. I've forgotten all my rules. There we go. Uh, Share. And if I just make it full screen, there.
Mm,
It's just, I
mm,
hope everybody can see that.
yeah.
This shows you the mountaintop setting and then this lovely, yet another sort of fabulous view with the setting sun. But it is just, there's nothing better.
There is something special as well, I think, about, I mean, it's also true to other extents about Ferrara and Mantua, the two other bases on this tour. But Urbino is so, I mean, I see this when I'm looking at your image, especially the one on the left. It's so contained. It
Mm,
really is like an
yeah.
eerie, like an eagle's eyrie up on
Yes,
top of the,
exactly. Exactly.
and it's so beautifully preserved and small and walkable, and it is a kind of a jewel box. But as I
Yep.
look at it, I'm also struck by how it exemplifies the theme that we're talking about as well. So maybe could you explain to us what are the Renaissance courts of Italy? How is this a court? You described it as a palace that is a city. So what is a court?
Yes. Well, I mean, obviously, it's personal rule that we're talking about and that we're following in this tour. So, unlike Florence and Venice, which are republics and which are governed by committee, although, as we know, Florence actually, the Medici are sort of unofficial rulers of Florence, but they still have to work through the communal organs of government, whereas the courts are personal and it is a family, usually a local family that over the course of the centuries becomes dominant over the other local families and establishes princely rule. So it is court culture in miniature because I mean obviously Italy at this time is not a single nation, so we have courts in numbers of places, particularly in northern Italy. It's more common, but all many of these places started out as communes, as republics, but then one family and one particular member of the family would be holding a communal office but would kind of consolidate power, and then it would become dynastic. Then it would become succeeding members of the same family, and
Mm,
much more so than in the republics. What is so fascinating and that we'll see time and time again is the way in which the court is defined by the prince. So the court is the prince. And so we see, it is a different kind of art that we'll be looking
mm,
at. If you've been to Florence, or Venice, these courts are really different. And it's a lot more secular art, as one might expect, but it's also art that is focused around the prince. And
mm,
so we get the chance to meet these different families, and particularly we're concentrating on the famous 15th century courts. So we'll meet these individuals like Federico da Montefeltro and Ludovico Gonzaga, and the members of these ruling dynasties who really shape the urban environment around themselves and
mm.
use art for political purposes. So that's what we're looking at.
You can see the shaping so
Yeah,
clearly, I think, again in that image on the left, because I think about how in a city, well, I call it a city, but it has walls. In a town, let's say, of the size of Urbino, you can see that it's small enough for the Duke to shape in his own image. You can see from the images you've chosen as well, I think, that this is clearly a strategic place as well. You know, he's holding territory that is
yeah.
useful to someone. That's his job. It's quite interesting to me to think about how the three places you're visiting, there's such a history of those personal rulers in those places being able to make their
Yeah,
money through kind of strategy and military enterprise, but then how they
and
reinvest
warfare.
that.
I
And
mean,
warfare, yeah.
that's right, because all of the rulers that we'll be discussing,
Mm,
all the 15th century rulers, without exception, are condottieri. So they're mercenary captains, and Federico de Montefeltro, who we'll talk about at the end, the ruler of Urbino, was the most successful military man of his day. And communes and cities would pay him not
Not.
to come to war. He was so famous. He almost never lost. But all of them were, it's this idea, and obviously it was part of a territory as well. They could
Mm,
build up territory, and Urbino is
mm,
another instance of that. That it was much smaller when Federico came to power, but he grabbed a lot of territory
mm.
for
I
his, state.
we should all aspire, I think, to have a job where we're paid not to do our job because we're so good at our
Yeah,
job. That's the kind of
fantastic, isn't it?
that's the job I want to have. And I'm always reminded when I look at Urbino and think about him that one of Federico's biographers said that he earned so much from warfare that he waived taxes. People in this city that we're looking at, no one
Yeah,
had to pay taxes because his personal wealth was so great. And I suppose
because
if
he was so successful.
because he was so
Yeah.
successful. And so, if with some reluctance we leave Urbino and travel instead to Ferrara, which is our first kind of chronological court, just in
Yes.
terms of the art,
Yep.
interesting art that was produced. I mean, speaking of people who
Yeah.
reinvest their fabulous wealth back into the town, can you tell us a little bit about who the personal figure in Ferrara is in the 15th, well, 14th, 15th century?
Right. Well, it's really interesting to think about the differences as well as the similarities in the courts that we'll be going to. So Ferrara is the Este family, and Ferrara's a big court relatively and very wealthy and successful, as opposed to when we get to Mantua, it's little. And in fact, it's pressured by Ferrara on one side and
Mm,
Venice on the other. So Ferrara has a whole sort of existing architectural history that we saw, like with this magnificent Romanesque cathedral and these wonderful streets. Like this is this fabulous Via delle Volte, where I have to say I ate the best pumpkin what are they called? The ravioli in my life.
Tortelli,
So if we,
yes.
when we go there, I want to go back to repeat that experience. But this is the Este Castle, which is plopped in the middle of
Mm,
Ferrara, and it really expresses in the most sort of emphatic form that they are the rulers. And it is fortress-like, and it really kind of is a very tough expression of Este control. But I mean, is in all of these, the Este, come to power and continue to be in power with, in a way, the rest of the families agreeing to it.
mm,
So, and it's quite a big sort of agricultural center as well, so that's also where they get their wealth from.
mm,
And but so the rulers that we'll be looking at are three brothers. In fact, in Ferrara, it's three brothers, one after another, who succeed each other, and their names, I think, are lovely in the way it shows the kind of combined interest, which we will be talking about a lot, between interest in the Arthurian, chivalric,
mm,
romantic stories of Arthur and his knights in the Round Table that comes through France, that is like, your favorite novel that everybody at this period is reading. And we'll see a chivalric cycle in Mantua indeed. And that's also how these mercenary captains promote themselves as knights, that they are like the Knights of the Round Table, but also the classical. So the first and eldest is Leonello, little Leo. And then there's Borso, who's named after one of the Knights of the Round Table, Sir Bors. And then the last one is Ercole, Hercules. So, they're three sons of the previous ruler of Ferrara, but they're given this great constellation of names. And so Leonello is ruling Ferrara in the 1440s, and is a patron of Pisanello, who's an artist that we will
mm,
see his works, not actually in Ferrara, but in Mantua, because these courts are also looking at what each one is doing and kind of wanting to, oh, that artist is doing these fabulous things for my rival over there, so I want him. So we will constantly see the same artists circulating and working for different courts. And so this is this magnificent portrait of Leonello, which is actually in Bergamo, in the Accademia Carrara. And he brings by Pisanello, who's this international Gothic artist who is like the famous artist of the early 15th century that all the courts want. And he invents the phenomenon of the Renaissance medal, which is like a Roman coin with the portrait of the ruler on one side and then a kind of a device on the other often. And the first ones are made for Leonello, kind of using this, how the portrait becomes almost like his brand. And then he kind of repeats it because these medals are, the first mass image in a way. This is before printing really gets off the ground. So everybody, you can make obviously multiples of the same one medal and then hand it out to all your courtiers and your ambassadors and etc. And it's based on the portrait. And you can see he has what was considered at the time a leonine hairdo, this very specific hair, and it's all sort of bushy and virile, but at the same time it's controlled. And Leonello was a mercenary captain, but he has this image of himself as both a mercenary captain and tough, but also sort of sensitive and a patron of the arts and a patron of humanism. And I put on the bottom, the one we're looking at, the back of the medal designed by Pisanello, where you can see the artist's signature very prominently there. But I love this because it was made around the time he was going to be married. And so it's this idea of Cupid teaching the lion to sing. So, love conquers all. But so I believe that there are some medals, at least one that we'll be able to see when we're in Ferrara, one of the Pisanello medals. And, he patronizes artists from Ferrara who are very distinctive. It's quite a sort of crowded artistic marketplace, I think, and artists really want to promote themselves as being sort of different. And Ferrara really has a very characteristic artistic style, which is kind of quirky, sometimes spiky, sort of very linear. And this is Cosmetura, one of the main Ferrarese artists that we'll look at, and we'll see this. This is in the Cathedral Museum, and it's St. George, who is the patron saint of Ferrara. And I had to throw in because I just love that dragon. Like, is there not? It's not a more beautiful dragon.
Look at the glint in
But the
his
way that
eye.
you've got the fabulous wings and this sort of spikiness and this kind of intensity of line is very characteristic of Leonello,
And the
of
beautiful,
Cosmetura and the artist Leonello patronizes.
but the gold highlighting as well on the curve of the dragon's neck
Yeah,
and catching on the end of its vintage. I
yes,
mean, it's
yes,
this
just
is such an.
fabulous.
I'm so glad you chose this work in the from the Cathedral Museum in Ferrara because I think for those of us who are
Yes,
listening along, people are say familiar with the great artists associated with Urbino like Piero della Francesca or with Mantua like Andrea Mantegna. Those are names
Mantegna.
people
Yeah,
know. But I think people are much less familiar with the local artists
yes,
in the Ferrarese tradition. And I think
yeah,
your word spiky is a great way to
yeah,
characterize the Ferrarese
yeah,
style in the 15th
yeah. Well,
century.
and I was going
Many.
to say, unfortunately, a lot of it is in London. So some of
Mm,
his best works are in London. So if you go to the National Gallery, you can see them. But this is in Ferrara,
mm.
so we will see it. But the other thing, of course, is the Schifanoia.
Thank you. That was
So
going to be my next question because
your next question,
you
yes.
knew,
Oh,
you
and I had
anticipated.
to show you the beautiful
Oh, look at that.
this is the squirrel from that same the other side. These are organ shutters. They're really
Mm.
unusual. They're unusual that they've survived and they're painted on canvas.
Are they
But
distemper?
yes,
Are they
the
painted in distemper, Louise? I can't remember because they're so,
ah
or is it just a
from
restoration
memory they
question?
may be, which is why they have a sort of
Yeah,
brownish color. Like
yeah, kind of a
I'll have to
thinness.
go back and have a look, but they're very, and they're not in great condition,
Mm,
but they're still fabulous, and it's very typically Tura. But of
mm,
course, he and other artists, the reason, the tour de force, the masterpiece that we go to see is the Skipa Noia,
mm,
which means banish care, away with care. And in terms of thinking about court spaces, this is this giant reception hall on the first floor of the palace, and I've got a little view there. You can just see the outside, and it's a hunting lodge
mm,
in the this in towards the edge of the city, and it was already in existence. I think it was earlier 15th century, but in the 1470s, the next ruler, so Borso, Leonello had died by then. Borso d'Este commissions a whole team of artists to fresco this room. And this is the first room that you come to, or one of the first rooms that you come to after you come up the big grand ceremonial stair to the first floor, which is the main living area. And this is where the prince receives you. And it's, you just imagine it peopled with, courtiers and ambassadors and everyone. And it is this like drop dead amazing
mm,
fresco cycle that unfortunately, as you can see
mm,
in some parts, has not survived as well. But it is very erudite and unusual, and it's clearly Borso d'Este himself wanting to have an amazing showcase place room that really shows off what a cultured court he has, and a court where humanists are patronized. It uses draws on very unusual classical sources for some of its imagery. And once again, we see how much it's focused around the prince as well. Because
mm,
what it is it's a cycle of the months. And it's called Sala dei Mesi, the room of the months. And so each one of these vertical sections is 1 month. And the walls are divided into three registers that go all the way around, and then it has this wonderful fictive architecture, painted, pilasters, and at the top of each register is the planetary gods associated with each month. In the middle are these personifications of a third of the month, so 10 days each, called the decans, which is this totally abstruse. No
mm.
one's ever done this before. It comes from a particular classical text that was being translated and commented upon in Ferrara at this time. So you can just imagine the Duke saying, "Oh, yes, my humanists, my writers have just worked this out, and you don't know anything about it, and let me explain it to you." But combined in the middle with the zodiac sign and the planetary
Mm,
sign. And then down the bottom, the a kind of a calendrical cycle based on the traditional labors of the months, which we will see a fabulous example, Romanesque example, in the Cathedral Museum,
yes.
so that you'll have that kind of background when you get to see this. So it's the activities of each month, but it's the court activities. And it's all around Borso d'Este. And he appears in every single scene, often multiple scenes, and he's quite old. Like, he's not
Mm,
presenting himself as young and beautiful, but he's surrounded by young and beautiful men, and it's really all about the prince. And there are lovely games where just you can see like that figure sitting on the painted cornice with his knees sticking
mm,
out into the real space of the room. So you can just imagine how this is all about impressing everybody, but also it's for the a subject of conversation for
mm,
courtiers, and it is about stimulating witty conversation, and so it's sort of it's very courtly art. These are details from the month where Venus is in charge, and so there are all these courtiers, merrymaking and lovemaking, and it's very much an image of the court that's
mm.
being reflected back, but a kind of idealizing image that, of course, is all about Borso. Um, as we
But it
see him
also,
here dispensing money,
mm,
to a dependent, and there's another one where he's on hunt, etc., etc. Um, so it's and I would say they have also been very recently restored in the last couple
mm.
of years, so they are looking better than ever. So
Yeah.
this will be a fabulous thing to see.
It's a highlight for me because, as you say, it sets out such a complex world and there's so much detail to look at. But I think it's also, it exemplifies how the court works, that the prince is kind of
Yeah.
above as the presiding genius, but he has to have humanists who are working together with his preferred artists. And we've got such great documentation for this room as well. We know how artists wanting to work on the project were trying to angle for better pay rates and on the
Yep.
basis of the quality of the
That's
work.
right.
It's such a
Yes, yes. You
well,
can't just pay me by the meter. My art is much better than that. Yes.
and people who are watching and listening might have read the Ali Smith novel How to Be Both, and these frescoes are kind of a catalyst for that novel. It's a really intriguing and beautiful novel, half of which is
Oh, I
set.
don't know that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
half of it set in Renaissance
Right.
Ferrara. If you like the writing of Ali Smith, you'll like the novel. If you don't normally like Ali Smith's writing, then it wouldn't be for
Right.
you. But yeah, I love these frescoes
Right.
as a kind of a symbol of what the court represents. And there's so many connections within them. And because my job is to be timekeeper, as we move on, say, to Mantua now, the thing about
Yes, we have to keep
Ferrara,
going. Yep.
yeah,
Yep.
and Ferrara and Mantua are
Yeah.
kind of practically connected as well, because, of course, people will hear the word Este from Ferrara and think of Isabella d'Este, who ends up in Mantua. So there's obviously
Yep.
intermarrying between the two courts
Yes.
as
All right. Good.
well.
Yeah. I'll just show you these
Yes.
the whole. We also walk around the ideal town which the next duke creates, Ercole, and where he doubles, more than doubles the size by adding a whole other area. And I think that's one of Ferrara's charms, is these beautiful broad streets and
Yeah. And that amazing
magnificent
building.
palaces, which we will go to, like the Palazzo delle Diamante. But I did throw in Giotto
Oh,
as well
yes, the
before we
side
get
trip.
to Mantua,
Yes.
because we do a little trip to Giotto's Arena Chapel, which I won't talk about because we can stay here forever. But a masterpiece of 14th century art, the, like, the Sistine ceiling of the 14th century, but it's a whole chapel. It's just splendiferous. It takes your breath away. Come and see it.
Yes, I mean, you and I had some debate about whether to include this on the tour, and I put some weight behind including it because I think a double visit here, people watching may know that you kind of get kicked out after 15 minutes, and we book a double visit so that people can stay in with Louise for 30 minutes. And Louise, the idea of spending 30 minutes in this chapel with you, I would be very, very jealous of anyone who's able to do that.
Yeah.
But we've had a question come through. Could we repeat the name of Ali Smith's novel? It is called How to Be Both. How to Be Both is the
Mm,
name of the novel. Very intriguing novel, very topical. But yes, so I did argue for the, the day
yeah.
trip to Padua mostly because I felt people should have the benefit of visiting that with you.
No, I think it's a good idea. If we're up in northern Italy, we should just make a quick dash
Why
across.
not?
Yeah. Yeah.
But here we are
So
in
Mantua.
yes,
Yeah.
swampy Mantua. Swampy no more.
Swampy Mantua. Yeah, well, and Mantua, as I say, is a little, not particularly wealthy state in the early 15th century, squeezed by Ferrara on one side
Mm.
and Venice on the other, who have territorial ambitions on Mantua. And it's marshy and swampy, and it's surrounded by this marsh, as you can see in this lovely 16th century map. And really, what we see in Mantua, I mean, as you see in Ferrara and as you see in Urbino, but it's about remaking the city to be this impressive site, like kind of cultural capital. And so Ludovico Gonzaga, who's the ruler, he's called sort of a little marquis, but a significant one, an impressive one. He wants to transform Mantua because they had in the early 15th century, they had no, it was in the 1440s, I think, but they had a church council in Mantua, and the Pope later on complained that it was, he couldn't sleep because of all the frogs that were creaking all night and kept him up. And so you go from frogs to, you know, magnificent buildings and this kind of gracious, erudite, beautiful city. So that's what
Mm,
Ludovico engineers through a series of fantastic commissions, both architecture and painting. So I won't, we don't have enough time to talk about it, but I wanted to throw this in because I think really one of the great things about this tour is seeing the rooms. Like
mm,
this tour, more than any, we get to see these amazing spaces with frescoes that are in situ in the rooms. And it really gives you such a strong sense of how the painting is adapted to the site that you don't really get through slides, and so whether it's the Arena Chapel or this is the Ducal Palace with frescoes by Pisanello that are not very well preserved, but are nonetheless fascinating because it's arthurial imagery. It's all about knights in armor, and we have the underdrawings as well as the painted layer above. And I mean, it's the most magnificent drawing. And this is a tournament where they're all clashing together at these fabulous, pom-poms on their helmets, etc. And that's the finished one. Um, just marvelous. But then some decades later, you get Mantegna being brought from Padua as court painter, and this is the later painted room that Ludovico Gonzaga commissions, which is the so-called Camera degli Sposi, the room of the newlyweds. And it's a square tower room that is completely covered with fresco. And that
mm,
is just, again, one of the masterpieces of Renaissance art. And I mean, you can't, these are little images, but I put them on
mm,
together because I wanted everyone to see how on two walls, it's as if there's this
mm.
wonderful play of illusion and artifice. And on two walls, the curtains are down. And then on the other two walls, the curtains are pulled back, painted curtains to show the ruling family at home, as it were, and he integrates the architecture, the actual architecture, so brilliantly into the painted illusion.
Mm.
And then,
To the
so you
point
see
where we
here
should probably let people know, oh, there you can see it in this, that what looks like molded stuccos on the ceiling
is
is
all paint.
paint.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's all paint. Yes, everything except the what you can see, the actual corner, the
Mm,
capitals, but and of course the mantelpiece.
mm.
But even that's a painted carpet hanging down
Yeah.
over, and the mantelpiece is made into a continuation of steps, and then there's the
Yes.
courtiers coming up and down the steps. So it's fantastic. And then of course, there's more. I love the way that the curtain is pulled back by these flying angels and then tucked in behind the door, the cornice of the door. So it's just perfect.
But
And then, of course,
it
the
is
most
again such a
famous, or,
it's such a great visualization again of the court in that you're seeing the
yes,
members of the court on a plane above
yes,
your,
all of these.
I'm
Yep,
not worthy, am I?
yep, yep,
I'm at a lower kind
yes.
of
And
level
then,
to
and
where
then
they
you get
are.
these.
Yeah.
That's right. Everyone looking down at you. This famous view, absolutely revolutionary, where it's
Mm.
as if there's an opening in the ceiling up to the sky, and people are looking at you, and maybe you're in danger of having a flower pot fall on
It
you,
does feel
or
like it.
even accidents might
Mm.
happen from the pooty. I mean,
Yes.
it's very funny.
I mean, we're
It's
doing
it's
quite
great.
well for time, Louise. So I did want to ask you while we're looking at, because I think probably the Camera degli Sposi or the bridegroom's chamber is
Mm.
a room that people might be familiar with. Mantegna, for me, he's an interesting figure in this story because when I think of great Italian art before or after this moment, I think of itinerant artists. And yet Mantegna is someone who comes to Mantua and spends the bulk of his career in Mantua and kind of is arguably paid by the meter because he's on a salary as a court artist.
He's on a court salary.
Yeah.
Yes,
How do you think
yes.
that changes the kind of art that's being produced here as opposed to, yeah, a Venice or a Florence where it's an open market?
Yeah. Well, I mean,
Do you
he
think
very
it changes
much,
it?
it's what the rule wants and
Mm,
whatever the rule wants, and as I say, these are all, state rooms. So we will get the chance to compare from the Ferrara Sala dei Mesi to the Pisanello room, which is exactly the same position as
Mm,
the Sala dei Mesi in Ferrara. It's like the first big reception room you come to on the first floor of the main ducal palace at Mantua. And then this room is a little different. It is like a reception hall, a reception room, but it's quite small, and it's a
mm.
room in a tower. And it did have a bed in it, but he would also receive people in it. So,
I want that
um,
job too. I want
you
to,
know,
I want to receive, have work meetings from bed.
well, it would be a day bed, I believe. But these are we can't talk about it in detail, but there are portraits of very the significant members, not just of the Gonzaga family, but their allies. So that the Prince of Denmark is there because he's married to, or he's a important ally. And so we have, for instance, the Duke of Milan writing
Mm.
to Ludovico Gonzaga and saying, "Why aren't I in there?" And he's like, "Oh, well, but Mantena's not a very good artist. Sorry, we didn't have the time, da, da, da," and puts him off. But so obviously people were looking at this. And again, it is very much, it's about art as cultural capital. And so
Mm,
the court artist is about doing whatever builds up the
mm,
ruler, which is, of course, what the Republican communal artists are doing too.
as
But I
well.
think what's different is it's more secular art, as we're
Mm,
seeing, and it's also much more focused on the person and the family of the prince. And so
mm,
in this case, also one of the big messages of the um, Camera degli Sposi is dynastic continuity. And so you'll see Ludovico Gonzaga with his son and with his grandson. So here's Ludovico, and here's his one son he's got enough sons to spare that he can have
yeah,
one son who's a cleric. This is his heir, and then this is, more sons and
lots of
then
spares.
grandsons. So he's got male relatives enough to spare.
Mm.
Um, so I
You
think
ha
that's the key thing.
Yeah, and you had, because we are dutifully, you and I think could go well over time talking about these things together. It would be such a pleasure, but you were transitioning us towards Rimini, a much smaller and maybe less known court. Maybe people who know Italy today know
Yes,
Rimini for kind of seaside holidays, or maybe for
yes.
Fellini. But someone that Rimini and Mantua have in common is the architect Leon Battista Alberti. So I assume that was where you were taking
Yeah.
us with this building in Rimini.
Yes, exactly. That I presume we could I can show you at least Mantua has two buildings by Leon Battista Alberti, but before that he works as an architect in for the Prince of Rimini, Sigismondo Malatesta, and this visit to the what's called the Tempio Malatestiana, the temple of the Malatesta, it's a Franciscan church, is one of Alberti's most beautiful buildings. Alberti is a humanist writer, but he is also like a very important theoretician of art. So he writes the first painting treatise in the Renaissance, Della Pittura, and he also is interested in architecture. And he is really, in a way, the first architect of the Renaissance, in the sense that he designs, but he doesn't build. Other people
Mm,
build. So it's the sort of
mm,
the modern idea of the architect in a way. And he is deeply familiar with classical antiquity. He writes the first modern architectural theorist. Whoops, sorry, I'm going to turn that off. Um, the 10 books on architecture. And this is the Rimini triumphal arch, the Roman Arch of Augustus, is which we will see is the basis for the Tempio Malatestiana. And then I have to throw in, because I am so excited to be going back to
mm,
Rimini, to this church, because inside a whole series of chapels commissioned by the ruler with drop dead gorgeous
Mm.
carving by Agostino di Duccio, who I think is an incredibly under neglected, magnificent Renaissance sculptor,
Here,
and
here.
a portrait painting by Piero della Francesca, which is down the bottom there. And
Oof.
these also have all been restored in
Mm.
recent years. And if there's, I can add another
Mm.
inducement to come. Sigismondo's emblem is an elephant. So there are elephants everywhere. I mean, what more could you want?
What more could you want? Well, I mean, I'm
But
so glad you brought up the reliefs because I agree with you. People go, I think, expecting to
yeah,
find
they're
the Piero
so
della
beautiful.
Francesca, but the reliefs are the things I think that blow people
Ah,
away
they
when, oh,
are.
and the crucifix
Yes,
when they step into this space. And we should say those are super low reliefs. They're kind of Donatello-esque squashed relief. They're so low. There's almost no
yes,
carving
yes.
to these.
Yes, they're in this beautiful white marble,
Mm.
and they're
And the
exquisite. And
light.
then you can see Piero picking up the
Yeah.
architecture in his painted architecture, so it's so brilliant. But so in Mantua, we will also see like
Mm.
Alberti's last building, which is his greatest, San Andrea. And I throw in the inside because it's just astonishing. It's
Mm.
like walking into a Roman baths. If
Yes.
it's this recreation of classical antiquity, and Alberti is all about how do you combine a temple front and the kind of triumphal arch in the one, and he comes up with different solutions, and we'll see the different ways that he works with that. Anybody who came with me to Venice last year, we talked about Palladio in Venice and how he combines the classical temple front with the triumphal arch at San Giorgio Maggiore and Redentore that we looked at. This is the next century. Alberti is setting that up in the 15th century.
We've been so
But
focused, Louise, before we move to Urbino, we've been so focused on the pleasures of the art in these places that when you show that image on the left, I think about the fact that there's a great bar opposite the entrance to that church. These are such beautiful,
I know that it's
yeah,
a cafe. It's the
yeah,
best place to just sit
yeah,
and look at
and
this
soak it in.
fabulous front.
Yeah.
I think that my motto when looking at Renaissance architecture, if you can, is to find the best kind of cafe, and then you can sit and command the view. You know, so
We've got
absolutely,
lots.
I do know that cafe.
Yeah, and there's lots of opportunities for this on that tour because when you showed the image of the Ferrara Cathedral, I immediately thought of the bar that photo
Right.
was taken from, which does a lovely aperitif. And then there's this giant pastry shop come bar next door to that, so you can
Oh,
even
right.
have
Well, you'll have to
a
give
great
me the
pastry.
address. Right. I look forward to that. Yes.
So yes, we should say that in addition to all the great art and architecture on this tour, these are also just really beautiful towns and cities to be in. But I think you were taking us into the
They
Mannerist
are.
world of the
Yes.
Palazzo Te
Yes. Well, we
in
mentioned that
Mantua.
we would, I'll just show
Yes.
it in passing, but it's this giant palace in the 16th century, built for the Duke of Mantua. And this is, but again, it's the phenomenon of the court artist. Giulio Romano is Raphael's most talented pupil. He's trained by Raphael in Rome. He works with Raphael in Rome, but indeed, he's sort of he gets, he's so successful that the Duke of Mantua tries to poach him for quite a long time. And then finally, in the 1520s, he agrees and he comes. So he's like, after Mantegna, he's the next court artist. And he does everything. Like he works as a painter with Raphael, but, there's no break between painting, sculpture, and architecture. So he's also a
Mm,
magnificent architect. And this is his, pièce de résistance. And it's this, again, like a hunting lodge, but it becomes, like the model for all sort of the great palaces in the Baroque period.
mm,
It is an astonishingly large and magnificent palace on the outskirts. And this is where he has a meeting with the Holy Roman Emperor, with Charles V. And really, Charles V would see this and go, oh my God, I need one of these. And so this is how the Palazzo del Te, as it's called, is becomes the model for everything else. And it is also got sumptuous decoration that he orchestrates. He has a whole team of painters and stuccoists working with him. Stucco in imitation of classical antiquity. Very fun, clever games going on in the architecture, where one of the whatever they're called, not the keystones, but the
Glyphs, slipped glyphs.
dentals is it's like goes normal, normal. Oh, this one fell. Normal, normal. This one fell, and it's a joke, And it's he plays with rough and smooth. So some of them look
Mm.
as if they've just come from the quarries. And then I love the room of the horses,
Mm.
because Mantua is famous for breeding horses, and so there's a whole room that Giulio Romano paints with these beautiful portraits of famous stallions standing in front of gorgeous classical architecture. So once again, very
Mm.
kind of, I think the other thing about court art is it's very witty. It's
Yes,
very kind of, enjoying an in joke, and nothing shows that more than, again, another one of these fabulous
yes,
painted rooms where
yeah.
you're surrounded on all sides and you kind of completely get caught up into the story. This is the war between the giants and the Olympian gods who are up in heaven there, sending down thunderbolts, and the thunderbolts are causing the building to
Mm.
collapse. So you're in imminent danger of being, completely swept under the rubble. So get
And I
out while
mean,
you can.
and
So it's
that's an adult
hilarious.
sized, it's a regular sized doorway.
It's
I feel
huge.
the need
Yeah,
to
yeah,
say that
yeah.
because in this image you think, oh,
Yes,
that's a
you might
trapdoor
think
or
that's no,
something.
no, no. There's a person would be, like that high sort of thing. Yes.
It's an
But so I think that
yeah.
point about the wit and the
Mm.
enjoyment of things is very, and stimulating conversation and that sort of thing.
I like your point about the wit of courtly art because, well, for example, mannerism, as you know, I struggle, I struggle with mannerism, but I don't struggle with this at all. It is witty or playful or,
No, no,
there's so much
it's
going
just
on. It's so
funny and
engaging.
clever
Exactly. Yeah.
and very tongue in cheek, very tongue in cheek, knowing the rules and then playing with them,
Yeah.
like disrupting them deliberately. And there's, this is the keystone's about to collapse. It's just very funny. But so then now we end our lightning tour back where we started, back at Urbino. Um, and I put this one in just because it's the absolute canonical image of the
Mm.
Renaissance ruler who is both a military man and eminently successful, but he's also a ruler, so he's got his robes of state on. This is Federico de Montefeltro, who people paid not to come to war with. And he's dynastic continuity. He's got his young son next to him, all dressed up in robes of state and holding the little baton of command. But he's also a literary man at heart, a patron of artists and writers. And so there he is reading his book as well. And we will see this painting in Urbino. And it's just a fabulous sort of summation of the ideal Renaissance prince. And Federico de Montefeltro, indeed, he's one of the few people who has a biography written about him during his own lifetime, and he's extremely admiring Vespasiano da Bisticci, and so he's had good press all the way through. Somebody like Sigismondo, not so much, the patron, the Rimini patron, but Federico, everybody loves Federico. He's just fantastic.
Everyone except the people of Volterra.
Yeah.
It's the only
Yes,
kind of
yes, the massacre.
criticism you
Yes.
can find
No,
of him.
indeed.
One battle. But I see these images of Urbino and I think about how hard, I mean, Urbino's a reasonably difficult place to get to on your own. It should be said,
Yes.
kind of tucked into the center of the
Yes.
Apennines, which is kind of its
Apennines, right up.
point.
Yes, in the top. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, as you said, like a mountain eyrie. And I do remember once catching a bus from Arezzo, which of course
Yes.
is the way that Piero della Francesca
Yes.
would have come because that's, Borgo San Sepolcro is right next to Arezzo. And you go up and up and up and up, and then you get
Mm,
right to the top of the Apennines and there's the Tuscan plains behind you. It's a spectacular view. And then you
mm,
get to Urbino and that real sense of journeying
yeah.
that artists would make because Federico was offering such wonderful inducements
Mm,
like this. This is the view that travelers would get coming to Urbino. Very scenographic, this is the Prince's Palace, and then
mm,
it's actually a later cathedral, but there would have been a church, the church next door. And they're the stables, those gorgeous things down there. But this is the Duke's Palace, and it's very carefully calibrated so that it's exactly what you see as you're riding along. And you can see it from a long distance away, obviously.
There's so many beautiful. I was thinking while you were talking, so many things in Ferrara, Mantua, and Urbino, great artworks are no longer there because they were removable, sadly. And
Mm.
yet the immovable things like the palaces, the architecture remain. And in this case, in Urbino, also some of the amazing works inside this palace did survive, did not get carted off
Yeah.
to Rome in the 16th century, like the Duke's private study, for example.
Yes, yes. I'm just showing you, this a sense of
Yeah.
the prince everywhere. Federigo Dukes, is the princely emblems are plastered all over the building, and the quality of carving, the architecture of Urbino is beyond fabulous. It's just superb, and you just
Mm,
we can spend lots of time, working out what each of these emblems are and what they
mm.
mean. They're all about sort of, different aspects of Federico's self-presentation. They're so beautiful. But I did want to show you the courtyard of the palace
Yes,
because and the
please.
way you have this dramatic, you go through a
Mm,
low kind of entrance vault and it's quite dark. And then you have this vista of the courtyard beyond, and then you come out and
mm.
my partner Peter Cohane, who's an architectural historian, has been wont to say this is the most beautiful courtyard in the world.
Hard to
And
hard to
I
disagree.
kind of almost agree with him. It is just perfect.
It's
It's the
perfect.
architect is from Dalmatia,
Mm,
Luciano Lorana. There are other architects as well, but he's the main one. And the top bits are added on a bit later, but they did it quite
mm,
well. But
mm,
it's this gorgeous white marble, perfect clarity. It's
mm,
just and then this architecture, this level of architecture continues on the inside, with beautiful carved doors and this enfilade of rooms and the stairs and all this marvelous intarsia work.
the
Every
doors,
door
yeah.
in the palace has these. It has original fireplaces. It has It is now the National Gallery of the Marches, and it has work that Federico commissioned, like this ideal town that is what every Renaissance prince wants their, residence to look like. And the Piero, which was probably could have been made for the chapel, but we can't talk about that. But the
Yeah, that's
studiolo is.
that's a whole other story, isn't it?
Yes, another story. But the studiolo is the little study. That is this
Mm,
tiny little room covered with intarsia, and then originally with paintings of famous men from classical antiquity and from the medieval period and from the present. So I don't know, this is Euclid, for instance, the geometer on the right. But it is the intarsia also that is just
mm,
fantastic. It's this tiny little space, which is in one, it's the idea of the study and this idea that the ruler gets so sort of careworn from ruling that he needs a place to rest and take 10 and refresh himself. But it's a private space in one sense, but it's also, of course, a highly carefully constructed, orchestrated public space that he will allow intimates in. So if you
mm,
get admitted into this, I think it opens off the bedroom. It's very much about, what favor the Duke is showing you. And once again, that sense of the presence of the prince. It's
mm,
intarsia, it's like it's fictive benches and cupboards. There's a portrait of Federigo at one end. There are personifications of all the virtues that he hopes to be following. But I love the way it's all trompe l'oeil, this
Mm.
illusionism. And it's so much you feel that Federigo has just left everything,
Yeah.
there, and he's just stepped out and he's going to come back any minute. And so we see his armor hanging up. He's just taken it off, you feel. And there's his baton of command and the instruments, and, the cupboards are open so we can look in. And the
Mm.
instruments even are shown with the necks projecting outwards, so as if we could pick them up and join him in playing music. So it's
But it's all
a
flat, isn't
wonderful
it?
conceit. Yes.
We have to keep reminding people it's all flat.
Yes, it's completely flat and it's all done in different shades of wood. It is
Mm.
absolutely the most up to date and the most skilled
Mm.
artisans of the day. I think they might have been Florentine, but I can't
Yeah.
remember. I would have to look up the off the
No,
you know.
the
But
proud
anyway, it's
the proud
magnificent.
Florentine in me says yes, categorically. That the thing that's always
Yes,
rested with
but
me
I'm not
about
sure.
no, they were. But the thing that's always rested with me is that the measurements were sent to Florence. They were made in Florence and then sent back. And that just blows
Right.
my mind. The
Yeah.
precision, not just the precision of the art, but also of the craft that they
Yes,
worked to those measurements because
that's right.
people have done home renovations, measurements.
Yeah. And then he orders another one for Gubbio, which
Yes.
is now in the Met. Yes.
Yes,
But
for
yeah,
anyone going to New York, that's always a highlight. I think you kind of don't expect to find it, and suddenly you're in a second of
yeah,
these perfect rooms. Louise,
yes.
as we kind of wrap up, I'll just let people know. Thank you for those
I
of you
think
who have
that's
sent
the end.
through
Yeah.
questions and comments. And in the final minutes that we have, please send through any more that you might have in this time that we have. But Louise, it really struck me while you were talking today that this is a moment. It's a very discrete moment in time. It kind of really
Mm.
does correspond to the 15th century, and most of the courts that we're looking at
A little
here,
bit of this. Yeah.
yeah, by the
Yeah.
middle of the 16th century, they've dissolved for
Yeah.
one reason or another, mostly to do with the Italian Wars, which is a whole other kettle of fish. So, what do you see in
Yes.
that really
Yeah.
brief little flourishing window that we've looked at? What's the lasting contribution of these cities to let's go big, Western art?
Like these are some of the great works of the Renaissance. And I think, we keep coming back to these are done to commission, and
Mm,
it's the prince and the court that these are created for. But as in Florence, where I mean, in the 15th century, all art is done to commission. So it's not
mm,
a hindrance to invention. And what is so constantly that one sees is the way the artists respond to the desires of the patron and the needs of the patron. And so it's art. I mean, this is quintessentially art that engages with the past on multiple levels. I mean, we talk about the Renaissance as the revival of classical antiquity, and someone like Mantegna in first in Padua and then in Mantua is himself a kind of amateur archaeologist and a passionate lover of classical antiquity. And we see these references to the antique past all the time. But at the same time, as we were saying, the chivalric, the North, the Arthurian tales, all of that is still tremendously, that's not seen as old fashioned. That's also, reimagined and of tremendous relevance to these aristocratic or to these patrons who make their living by warfare. So I think it is a very distinct court culture that
mm,
is different in each place, but that shares commonalities and shares artists. And I think it's a fabulous way to experience a very kind of coherent culture, but many different varieties of it, and along the way to see some of the great masterpieces of Renaissance art and
mm.
architecture. So I think, it's a great opportunity, and I hope people will join me.
Louise, I hope they do too. I'm wildly jealous of everyone who does. Who would have thought we could have kept ourselves to 1 hour, but we have. And so we've had a question come
Yeah.
through from Dennis, which is why did Federico have the second studiolo made in Gubbio?
Because he's the ruler of a state. Like, it's not just Urbino, it's the Urbino and territories, the Montefeltro state, and it includes Gubbio, and that's his kind of second palace, second capital. And he's on the move. He's going.
Mm,
He works as the mercenary captain for Venice at various times, for Milan. So he's not just sitting at home. He's wandering about. And so there's another ducal palace at Gubbio, and it's a slightly smaller, but it's the same architects and artists are involved, and so you've done it once, you want to do it again. Wherever the Duke is, you have to have appropriately splendid accommodation. So Gubbio is another place that's great to go. It also is hard to get to, but
yeah.
it is it's down in Umbria now, but it's on the borders, Umbria, the Marche, and
Mm.
you can go from Gubbio to Urbino.
Yes, I've done it. It's a torturous. It's a bit like coming from Arezzo,
It's
as you
torturous
said.
unless
Yes.
you have a car. That's right. It's pretty torturous. Yeah.
It's even in a car it was torturous, but that's a lovely place for us to round up, I think, which is that yes, even though some of these places are small, because the prince was there, the legacy of the prince is there in all of its glory, despite the relative sizes of those places. So some of the
Mm,
most beautiful small cities in Italy created as a result of these amazing rulers. So
that's right.
Louise, as always,
And
thank
they're
you
all
so
very
much.
walkable, so
It's
we
true.
will be walking all around. So it's great. Yeah.
And all
Thank you.
with
It was
bonus,
fun to revisit.
wasn't it? I was also, as you did, I was revisiting some meals as well, because that's the other thing. All those three places also have their own great local gastronomic traditions. So all the things I love
Yes,
about Italy the
exactly. Yeah.
most. Well,
Yeah.
yes, thank you again, Louise, and thank you to everyone who joined us for this afternoon session, and to those of you who will watch the recording later. Have and enjoy the rest of your day, everyone, and thank you again, Louise.
Okay. Bye.